Thank you, everybody. I'm Kayoko from Yoga Gives Back, and I'm so excited to have this first annual Yoga and Empowerment Women's Empowerment Conference. And at first, I'd like to introduce Radhika Vekaria, who performed for us a beautiful piano and chanting. And she will play until like 5 past. So people who sign in later can still really appreciate your soulful, beautiful music. Thank you so much, Radhika.
Thank you, Kayoko. So nice to be with you all today. And you can just close your eyes and allow the music to take you. Set beautiful intentions for this event. Om Namah Shivaya. Om Namah, 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 Om Namah Shivaya. Shivaya, Shivaya. Om Namah 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 Shivaya. So that mantra was on Shiva. This week is Shivaratri. And this one is in the theme of today. It's for Kali, the protector, the nurturer, the Ma in the universe, the mother. Kali Kali Mahamaya. Kali Kali Mahamaya. Bhavani Shankariyo, Bhavani Shankariyo, Bhavani Shankariyo, Bhavani Shankariyo. Devi Devi Girija, Devi Devi Girija. Devi Devi Girija, 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 Devi Devi Girija. Kali Mahamaya. Kali Kali Mahamaya. Kali Kali Mahamaya. Kali Kali Mahamaya. Bhavani Shankariyo, Bhavani Shankariyo, Bhavani Shankariyo, Bhavani Shankariyo. Devi Devi Girija Hare Hare, Devi Devi Girija, Devi Devi Girija Hare Hare, Devi Devi Girija, Devi Devi Girija Hare Hare, Devi Devi Girija, Devi Devi Girija Hare Hare, Devi Devi Girija. Kali Kali Mahamaya. Kali Kali Mahamaya. Kali Kali Mahamaya. Kali Kali Mahamaya. Gonna close with a prayer. Thank you, Kayoko, for having me. Amazing work that you do in the world. A real representation of Kali. Join on the arms. Swasti Prajabhyah Paripalyantam Nyayena Margena Mahi Maheshah Goy Brahmanebhyah Shubhamastu Nityam Loka Samasta Sukhino Bhavantu Sarve Jana Sukhino Bhavantu Samasta Mangalani Santu Loka Kalyan Samavriti Rastu Vishwashanti Astu Om Shanti 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 Om Shanti 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 Om Shanti 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 Om Shanti Shanti. Join me on the Oms at the end.
Thank you so much, Radhika. It was beautiful. So you chanted. Could you tell us what you chanted today for us?
Yes, thank you for having me again, Kayoko. The first one was a mantra to Shiva. And Shiva is the all-pervading, beautiful, creative, and destructive force in the universe. Without Shiva, there would be nothing. Shiva is the nothingness and yet the everythingness. We exist because of Shiva. And the second one was Kali. Kali is the fierce and powerful Ma force in the universe. Kali is the one that we invoke when we need to do what is right, when we need to do what is integral, what is powerful, when we need to protect all good and pure things. Kali comes to the forefront. She's prevalent in all of us. She's also the nurturer and protector, the duality of ferocious when needed, powerful when needed, and subtle and soft, and mothering when needed. And then the third one is a prayer. Swasti prajabhyaha paripalayantam nyayena margena mahi mahishaha go brahmanebhyaha subhamastu nityam loka samasta sukhino bhavantu sarve jana sukhino bhavantu samasta sanmangalani santu loka kalyana samavriti-rastu vishwashanti-rastu, which is, in the translation by Greg Tebb, is, may it be well with the protector of the progeny of the earth, and let them lead with intelligence for a peaceful earth. May it be well with the connection between us and permanence. May it be well with all beings everywhere. In all births, let there be happiness. May auspiciousness be everywhere. Let good fortune be everywhere. And let there be peace everywhere. Namaste.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Radhika. Everybody can check in Radhika Vekaria's website and check her more beautiful chanting. So good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining this historic first yoga and women's empowerment conference from all over the world. We are very excited. My name is Kayoko from Yoga Gives Back, and we have amazing leaders from international organizations. I just want to say very quickly, the intention for this conference. There are three numbers I wanted to share to just explain how this happened. So I'm from Japan originally. I'm a U.S. citizen now, but Japan is, so number one number I wanted to share is 121. Japan is 121st in the gender inequality among 150 nations. So I look like, like yoga practitioners and blah, blah, but I have lived through quite a gender inequality myself from my childhood. So I know what it feels like in even advanced countries, industrialized countries. Next, 80, that's the percentage. 80% of the yoga practitioners are women. So this is a humongous, powerful community who can share a lot of very diverse experiences, no matter where you are. So, and I found my voice as a woman after I studied yoga, and that totally empowered me. So that's the background also why we are coming together, that I wanted to see how yoga leaders and women practitioners from all over the world, it would be great because I know every one of you has felt some kind of empowerment or transformation in your life after you started really taking the practice of yoga. And final number is 1. That's the first annual Yoga and Women's Empowerment Conference. And I really hope with the leaders we have today and more people joining from all over the world today, yoga practitioners, we can see like this kind of university big conference so that we can learn from each other. There are so many organizations, advocacy organizations that speak for women's empowerment and gender inequality and different elements. And this is a Women's History Month, and tomorrow is International Women's Day. So it's a great opportunity for all of us to come together. And I'm very happy to introduce our amazing panelists. I'll go alphabetically last name. So Dianne Bondy joining from Canada, representing Yoga and Body Image Coalition and her Yoga for All. Everyone will speak about the organization later, so I'm going to be very quick. And Tiffany Crukshank, representing Yoga Medicine Seva Foundation. And Hala Khouri is representing Off the Mat into the World. And Maggie LaRocca from Exhale to Inhale. And myself, Yoga Gives Back. And we have a wonderful, very talented expert in this field, feminism, socialism, and activism, who facilitate this conversation, Melanie Klein from Los Angeles. And Amanda Cunningham from Yoga Medicine Seva will be helping us to navigate these logistical things. But so I'll let Melanie take from here. Thank you, everybody. Thanks, Melanie.
Thank you, Kayoko. Thank you, Radhika. Thank you to everyone for being here. Hearing you speak, Kayoko, I was thinking of my own sort of full journey and how it's pretty incredible to be here this morning with so many of you from all around the world. Celebrating and honoring International Women's Day was actually my first big action and my first event that I organized as a young activist in 1995 while attending LA Valley College here in Los Angeles. I had heard about International Women's Day in my sociology of women's class and was absolutely amazed and incensed that I had never heard of it before. The fact that it had been first introduced by the Socialist Party in the United States in 1909 and eventually adopted in Copenhagen in 1911 and began to be celebrated all over the world, that, we were nearly 100 years in and I had never heard of that day, nor did I know that at the time that it was first introduced that women were already 60 plus years into their fight for women's suffrage here in the United States. And so it became really my mission at that point to honor women's history, our legacy, and all of its diversity, to move forward into the future and to challenge sexism and really gender inequity in all of its forms. So to be here in the yoga and wellness community so many years later is incredible, because it was both that class that I just described and my yoga practice that came in 1996 that were and have been the two largest elements in my own personal work. And certainly not only was International Women's Day not celebrated or even acknowledged in the United States except for maybe, you know, small feminist communities, it was definitely not something you saw on any social media sites or that people were talking about regularly. We didn't have conversations like this in the yoga community in the 1990s or even early 2000s. So to bring it all together is a really powerful full circle moment, because like Kayoko, again, it was my yoga practice and my feminist consciousness that really allowed me to have a voice and to even imagine that maybe decades later, I would be here with all of you and feel confident enough to even facilitate this conversation with the incredible women on our panel today. So as the personal is political, right, I want each person to begin, and I'll start with Maggie, to share a little bit about your own personal story as you are talking about your organization and its goal, right? Because it's so hard to separate those two out. So we want to inspire today. We want to talk about honor the past. We want to look to the future. We want today to be, as it's always been intended, a day of celebration and protest to challenge gender inequity. And so if you can marry that in some succinct way, each of you, I think it would be a wonderful starting point for today's conversation. So Maggie, I'll start with you.
Thanks, Melanie, and thank you, Kayoko, for your leadership. It's such an honor to be here with all of you today, particularly all the panelists, and to represent Exhale to Inhale, all of the teachers and the volunteers that comprise our community. So I'm very humbled to have this spot to represent that group. I have come to Exhale to Inhale with the goal to really think about different ways that healing spaces can be created for individuals that have experienced trauma. So the mission of Exhale to Inhale is to empower survivors of domestic violence and sexual assault through the healing power of trauma-informed yoga. So we're really taking that practice to communities that may not otherwise have had access to healing. So we, through our work since 2013, have been fortunate enough to work with over 40 different partners, many of whom are around the New York City area, and support over 3,200 different students within that practice. So it's been an amazing way to find that empowerment through trauma-informed yoga. With my background in mental health, I'm very interested in breaking down the barriers to support and knowing that when women are able to access the tools for healing that they need, they're really unstoppable in what they're able to do.
Thank you, Maggie. I also, do you want to add anything about what the initial personal inspiration was? Because to take on things like this, I mean, I know with students and all of the people in my community that I've spoken to, sometimes people feel a little overwhelmed, the idea that how can an individual create change? And today is very much about demonstrating, right, that we are part of the change, that we are also part of a collective. And when we come together, we're part of this larger constellation. And so I think there's something really inspiring to also share. What was it that allowed you or that gave you the opportunity to think big in that way, that inspired you to move past any potential personal obstacles to create this particular organization and do this work? What was that piece for you?
Yeah, so I would actually like to share a little bit about our founder, Melanie, because I think that's a great way to start. Our organization was founded in 2013 by Zoe LePage. I believe Zoe is actually on the call today listening in. And Zoe was a student at Barnard College at that time, and someone that she loved and cared about deeply was impacted by domestic violence. And so she had this vision to bring trauma-informed yoga to shelters in and around the New York City area. And from that, the organization really grew. And when I came to the organization as executive director, I was so inspired by that because it was just one person, like we were talking about before, one person who had a vision and really brought her passion to that and was able to make that dream a reality. So I think that particularly in these times when it can feel overwhelming about so many different social injustices, so many different challenges that women still face, but the power and the inspiration to take that first step can truly make a difference.
Thank you, Maggie, and thank you, Zoe. I love what you said about taking that dream and turning it into reality, because so often, not only are women, right, from all backgrounds, all ages, all ends of the spectrum, dealing with all of those institutional and external obstacles, but we're also dealing with the internalized oppression that really, makes us believe that we can't, or that we shouldn't, or that we're not capable enough, right? And so to begin as women to really translate our dreams or, ideas that we have and put them into motion and take action is so incredibly powerful in itself, to challenge those notions that somehow, right, women are less capable, really challenging sexism as an ideology at its core. So I really appreciate that you use that specific language, right? It speaks to so much, which actually makes me think of Dianne, and I'd love to go to Dianne next. Dianne and I have a very long personal history. We co-founded the Yoga and Body Image Coalition in 2014. And I was very inspired when I first met Dianne, because she had written about basically being an accidental activist, as she has often called it. And so I think it's a perfect transition to talk about how you stumbled into this world and the work that we've done in the coalition and the work that you've specifically done in Yoga for All, what the personal kind of path was, and specifically what the goal and the work is in those organizations. Dianne.
Thanks, Melanie, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to be on this very prestigious panel. Melanie and I, of all places, met over Twitter when I had a little bit of a meltdown in my 500th class, where I felt really marginalized on the mat. When I turn up in yoga spaces, I felt I was the only Black person in yoga spaces. I was the only person of size in yoga spaces. And I felt very ignored in those spaces. And so I wrote an article or a blog for Elephant Journal at the time. This was 2011. And it was "Yoga Isn't Just for Skinny White Girls." And the title was clickbait, in order to get people to read that there was more to yoga than the asana. There was more to yoga than, expensive clothing and expensive mats, and that there were people in yoga spaces that we weren't seeing. Why wasn't I seeing women of color in yoga spaces? Why wasn't I seeing people with disabilities in yoga spaces? And as a Black woman, I feel like I was among some of the most ignored people in these spaces. And so when I wrote that blog post, that's how Melanie and I became friends, and we started talking. And then it was Melanie's brainchild to come up with the Yoga and Body Image Coalition. And I enthusiastically agreed to be a part of it. And we were founding members at that time. And it was our intention to create this organization as an action branch to the book, Yoga and Body Image, 25 Stories of Beauty and Bravery. And it became this action arm. So I got to share a story in that anthology, and that really lit a fire underneath my ass, so to speak, to really make it a point of engaging women of color, specifically Black women, who could benefit from this particular practice. So that was kind of how we became involved. And it was always our intention to create forward-facing imagery within the yoga industrial complex that was more inclusive and more diverse, because that was not what we're seeing. So what you're seeing now is an explosion of that change, but we were on the forefront of that change back in 2010, 2011, 2012. So we've been in this work for about a decade at this point. And it was really that started the fire under my belly. And then I created my Yoga for All training, which was dedicated to making spaces more diverse. How do I teach teachers? As a teacher trainer myself, how did I teach teachers to show up and to disrupt spaces that felt really centered around white women wellness? Like, how do we bring everybody into that conversation? Because often we see women of color get left out in feminist movements. We see women of color get left out in the bigger picture, because things are often not made for us and often don't include us. So how could I change that narrative? How could I be a force that brings everybody into the space? And from there, I went on to write 2 books around making really diverse and inclusive and adaptable yoga spaces. I currently have a 300-hour teacher training called Path to Equity, which is about leadership, creating leaders that will continue to disrupt the narrative, that will continue to draw us all in. And I also have the podcast, Two Black Girls Talk About Everything. And on that podcast, my friend Dianne, as 2 Black women, her as a lighter skinned Black woman with that privilege, and me as a darker skinned Black woman with my privileges, speak about what it's like to navigate the world world in all ways, and to draw women of color into the conversation, and to draw women of color also to the center of the conversation, so that we all thrive in the center, that we're not always relegated to the edge, and that we're always allowing all voices to be heard and all voices to have relevance.
You know, I love as we're also storytelling in this way, Dianne, because as you're talking about, you know, sort of the birth of the coalition specifically, and the hashtag what a yogi looks like, and the ways in which we challenge that, I can't help but think of Dianne and I walking down the corridor at the Yoga Journal conference in the summer of 2014 in San Diego, going to meet Hala, who I'm going to go to next. Because after we had been working on the book, Anna Guest-Jelly and I, from 2011 onwards, and Dianne had been in the fold, and the coalition was formed, Off the Mat into the World was doing a series of, you know, leadership conversations at the time at various Yoga Journal conferences throughout the year. There had been one in New York, San Diego, and then eventually Colorado. And it was an opportunity to take some of these, as Dianne was saying, these kind of marginalized conversations were happening in little pockets, and allowing them to also come to the forefront and speak directly to a lot of the large yoga organizations such as Lululemon and Yoga Journal at the time. And it was, you know, the way that leaders are born, the way leaders are compelled. I mean, we were just walking in there and just going, oh, wow, we feel so incredibly out of place. And it was such a boon and a beacon to walk then into the room of several hundred people, to have the conversation with Hala and others that Hala had facilitated. And it's been incredible also to watch Off the Mat and Hala really begin to, you know, sort of evolve with all of this too. So I would love, Hala, for you to talk about your personal journey, the work of Off the Mat, and kind of add to this awakening that we've all had in the yoga community.
Thank you, Melanie. I know it's just so nice hearing both of you talk and just remember the way that we've been in community together for so long. And one of the things I've appreciated in my whole life, I've only ever worked with women. And there's always a shadow side to that as well, of course, because we've all internalized, you know, heteropatriarchy and white supremacy and all that, right? We all have that really important work to do. And for me, that's always been a draw. Those have been spaces where it feels like collaboration and trust and honesty and transparency feel more available and more like something we're all aspiring to. Yeah, so, you know, my journey, it's interesting to think about my journey, you know, as a Lebanese immigrant, you know, moving here from Beirut when I was 3, and so many of my memories of what shaped my activism had to do with feeling like I did not have a voice as a female in my household and in my culture. And I was very much raised to think that the only way I could be heard or get what I need is by being manipulative. I remember my mom saying to me, you always let the man think he's in power, but you really are. And so everything was about being sort of on the sly and not being able to just stand in my truth of who I am, because that wouldn't get me what I needed. I needed to manipulate, play the game, pander to men's egos, right? And I think that really, really shaped me I honestly have never reflected on my path in this way. So I'm so grateful to be asked this question in terms of becoming a trauma specialist, finding yoga, and then co-founding Off the Mat to the World with Sean Korn and Suzanne Sterling. So much of my journey has been about reclaiming my power and redefining power, not from a masculine stance, right? And not from a whiteness stance. And there's been a lot of unpacking around that. And so, you know, Off the Mat began sort of accidentally. You know, we were approached by 2 other women, Marianne Manilov and Elisa Hauser, who were at the Engage Network, and they were organizers, and they were trying to organize the Progressive Party. And they found that, you know, that the conservatives were super organized. They had it down, and they could like engage their communities really quickly. Whereas those of us on the left, we were super disorganized, and partly because we weren't beholden to a dogmatic belief system. There's more diversity on the left, yet there also wasn't a lot of organization. And so we started as a project, a political project, to organize progressive folks. And yoga spaces were spaces where typically people identified as progressive. And so they came to us asking us to build a curriculum around engagement and activism for yoga folks. And that really launched the three of us into an amazing collaboration of doing empowerment work and leadership work together, and really finding what it's like to collaborate. And to me, that's a very, I mean, I struggle with binaries. I think about all my transgender friends who are like, oh, binaries aren't so useful. So I just want to like name that. And I want to include like my trans friends and trans folks in this conversation as well, because they are also on the margins and in the cracks and in the fissures of our world, right? So, you know, that spirit of collaboration is really what Off the Mat is about. And supporting folks to find their place in this tapestry of life, of working towards collective liberation, and finding that place based on our own knowingness of ourselves, not just our personal selves, but our social location, our cultural conditioning, and building a program that's really about getting us into our bodies, our minds, and our hearts, and continuously peeling away the layers and disrupting the ways that we are reproducing a culture of domination, right? And that's where, you know, if you're in a female body, if you're in a trans body, a Black body, a brown body, right? Any body that is not normalized knows that feeling. And so, you know, so much of my journey has been about, I don't even want to say reclaiming that because I never had it, right? But about redefining what it means to be empowered, you know, and also as somebody who fits normative stereotypes of beauty, I got very much pegged into that as well, you know, thinness, being light skinned. I also felt like that was something that was valued more than who I was on the inside. And so I definitely carried a lot of privileges because of that, but also had to undo a lot of how I get my worth, and how so often women are told to get our worth through our body shape, our sexuality, how we look, etc. So it's exciting to be in a conversation like this, because I think that it's about creating something that we've maybe never known, and the really deep layers that even as women, we reproduce the things we want to change. And so, you know, this amazing panel of folks, I know we're all really dedicated to going deeper and not just reproducing these dynamics, but actually transforming them.
Thank you, Hala. So much of, there was a lot that you said I want to come back to before I go, or as I transition over to Tiffany. I think one thing that's so clear in listening to Kayoko, Maggie, Dianne, you, and even the bit that I shared, it's like, there isn't some, you know, standard way or, you know, official way that anyone comes to this work. We all, in some way, it was a combination of stumbling and feeling compelled, right? That's that combination, which really indicates that every single person on this call and every single person in our extended communities have that same possibility, right? Is when we have just a little bit more belief than disbelief that we can play a really active role. And it's going to look in so many different ways. And we all have something to offer. And then the point is to do that as an individual, but also then to collaborate with others. And so, you know, while I have collaborated with some people on this panel before, there are others like Maggie and Tiffany that I haven't yet. And yet we're here today, and it's such a wonderful opportunity to create some more bridges. Because, for example, Tiffany is someone who's been in my orbit for, I don't know, at least 15 years. I've watched her work and her organization, and we've kind of all swum around each other, but haven't had an opportunity to connect. So today is a testament to part of that. This is about not just sharing and celebrating and taking that pledge to choose to challenge, but it's just an opportunity for us all to be together right now in real time. Every single person on this call, this is just such a unique opportunity to be here as a collective and begin to just feel how vast this community is, right? And so, Tiffany, I want to pass it over to you, because not only is it a pleasure to be able to be here with you today, something that, you know, at some point 10 years ago, I knew eventually it would happen, didn't know what form, but also, you know, to hear your story, because I have no doubt, like everyone else here, you know, it was a combination of that feeling compelled and stumbling into creating the organization that you have today, especially the Seva branch. So we would love to hear that.
Thank you. And like everyone else, thank you so much for putting all of this together. Thank you for that incredible music to start us off. It's such an honor to be here and have such great companions too, and to get to collaborate a bit. As I think everyone else has kind of mentioned, there's obviously a lot longer story behind all of these things that we're talking about. But I think the short and sweet of it for me, the big change for me was when I was at Nike. They had a nonprofit called the Girl Effect, and they had this. I remember watching this video that they had at the time that was talking about sex trafficking in the industry, and I just know that from that moment on, my view of that whole industry changed. And as a woman, it was hard to imagine any greater injustice than human trafficking or sex trafficking. I really couldn't even wrap my head around it. It blew my mind. And it was a topic that I've been drawn to ever since. I feel so compelled to help this community of people and to break this cycle that is such a incredible thing. And it really blows my mind when we start to look at all of the statistics and just how organized and how profitable the industry is and how thriving it is in most parts of the world, and especially in India in particular, where we do a lot of our work. And as the yoga medicine community grew, I really wanted our community to be able to offer something back to the world, something other than teaching. Of course, we all know that teaching is an important part of that. And for me, I started teaching in the 90s, and when you started teaching back then, as I'm sure many of you remember, it was really giving up any attachment to money or fame or wealth, and it really was very much an act of service and serving our communities. And for me, it was so important to have that within our community, which really is, the bulk of what I do is really training teachers, as many of you do as well. And so being able to teach from this place of service, I think, is such an important thing for me as a human, putting my whole life in perspective, my work in perspective, for us as a community, putting how we interact in perspective, and seeing that each of us has a really important contribution to this world, and that might change many times over. And for me, education is such a big part of that empowerment cycle. And as we were educating so many women, and we all know that the yoga industry really is female dominant, and watching that ripple effect of empowering women through education, and really wanting to offer that to more people who didn't have access to education. And as I was going on my trips to India over the years, and seeing and learning more, and just feeling the hopelessness of the industry there, and really wanting, my desire to start Yoga Medicine Seva Foundation was really coming from this wanting to use the strength of our community and the compassion of our community to give back to a culture that really has given us everything. It's given us this precious gift of yoga. So for me, what we do is really about using our platform to bring other female voices forward in these topics and conversations, and also to serve this community that's given us so much.
Thank you so much, Tiffany. There were a lot of gems in what you said too that I'm going to circle back to, but I think the one that you just sort of ended with was one of the big through lines that was really important, in addition to obviously the very specific work that your organization does and your inspiration for it, and which was, you're talking about your platform to bring other voices to the forefront, which is obviously something, right, Dianne and I had also talked about. And Hala, you had mentioned that, and Maggie, and Zoe in your own form with your organization. And I think even when you had talked about, Tiffany, like what the yoga community looked like in the 1990s, right? That gift of service. I think it's just such a testament to, there was a massive shift from about 2004, I would say, until about 2016. There's been a shift now, but during that time as that yoga industrial complex really took off, as social media came into the conversation, as the idea of the influencer and the yoga body and the yoga celebrity, right, all came into the forefront. For me as a longtime feminist, and looking and knowing the importance of solidarity and community, and seeing that missing so often, right? And seeing people with massive platforms who were completely, right, adding and contributing to the marginalization of really incredible people doing incredible work in communities, that I think that's such an important piece. Like, how do we use our platform? How do we use our voices, right? our position for good? How do we use it to bring other people into the fold? And so such a great way to end, Tiffany, with you to say that as a reminder that we all have an opportunity to do that, and to send the message out to continue, right? People who have large platforms, is like, how can you also use that for good? How can you pay it forward? How can you pass it on? And how can you bring other people into the center, right? Not just in your stories, but in your actual feed, right? How can we continue to do that? Because solidarity is so incredibly important. And I know for me personally, this opportunity for us all to be together, if we just walk away with having that be a central point in our awareness that, you know, it's not just us, and not just to center our brand or our story, our desire, but really to create space and let other people lead as well. That to me would be one of the biggest wins from this. So I really love the ways in which you and your organization do that, and the fact that you spoke that. I want to shift one of the other questions, and I recognize there's always going to be overlaps, right, in the questions that we have. So some of you have sort of spoken to this, but I want to see if there's anything else you want to add, which is, you talked about your own personal inspiration and your organizations. And, you know, another question is, how does your organization apply yoga philosophy, yoga practice in empowering women and addressing gender inequality? And it can look a lot of different ways, right? Sometimes people think that, you know, when we're talking about gender-based activism, that there's a certain way it looks, or there's a certain focal point. But what we can see here is it can be lots of different ways, both overt and covert. So instead of just calling on someone, is there someone who feels, you know, compelled to share first? Feel free, Maggie, Tiffany, Dianne, or Hala, to just unmute yourself, the ways in which your organization and your work uses yoga and yoga philosophy specifically, either of those, to really begin to empower women and challenge gender inequity. Okay, Kayoko?
Yeah, so I did a little bit of introduction, but I thought I should explain a little bit about Yoga Gives Back also, because like Tiffany said, it's interesting. I really appreciate how everybody has covered the history from 1990s to now. I started Yoga Gives Back 2007, and at that time there were a lot of, you know, study, like a nonprofit organization or advocate organizations, like Off the Mat into the World was like my big front runner. Like, how can we become like that, you know, impactful like that? And like 15 years later now, like we're in matured situation, like level, and I just feel like we're here together to really share the wisdom and experience that you have all accumulated last 1 or 2 decades. And that Yoga Gives Back, I started because I was just a yoga practitioner in 2007, coming out of Ashtanga class and sweating, and, you know, just like many of you today attending, feeling a huge benefit inside out about yoga practice. And then I thought about India, where yoga was from. There was so much poverty, and women and children the most impacted. So I wanted to tell everybody who get benefit from yoga practice to give back to India. And our mantra became, for the cost of one yoga class, you can change your life. So we started with microfinancing, and then very soon I realized all the mothers, we give little microloans. They say, I don't want my children to live like me, which was a very sad statement, but everybody told me that. And so now we give a scholarship for higher education. We've seen hundreds. Now we give 300 young people with 5-year scholarship for education. And so our yoga approach in terms of gender inequality and empowerment is a little bit different. We don't use yoga itself, I mean, asana or meditation practice. I think I realized later, but it's like a Seva or karma yoga in action, and giving back and empowering together. So we talk about today, like what we go through, but just let's also don't forget that there are women and, you know, girls who just don't even have internet. They can't express their voice. And I just have such a faith in this women group in the yoga community who have such sensitivity and power to speak about these very important voice of the voiceless, and we can so do it together. I just wanted to say that. Thanks.
Thank you, Kayoko. Yeah, exactly. I mean, the way, one of the conversations is not only, that yoga bodies are diverse, right? Yoga practitioners are diverse, but that the yoga practice and the way that we use and live our yoga takes on so many forms, in the same way that activism is not one dimensional or one size fit all, that we all live our values, we do our feminism, we do our yoga, we do our anti-racist work, we do our all of the work challenging the systems of oppression that exist in different ways, and they are all incredibly worthy. They're all incredibly necessary. So I think that was a great way to demonstrate that, Kayoko. And I would love for Maggie, Tiffany, Dianne, or Hala, whoever would like to share next, or what are the different ways, right, that you're using yoga to challenge gender inequity and or create empowerment for women. I'm going to get in my professor mode and be like, I'm just going to call on somebody.
I love what she said. I really think it's the underpinnings of what we do. For us as well, yoga is not the focus of what we're going out there and teaching. It really is about educating and breaking the cycle through education, because that's the only way to break the cycle, especially in sex trafficking, because a lot of times women are forced to go back out there to make money. And so for me as a woman who has been privileged to have education at my fingertips, I feel like for me, it's been so powerful in empowering me and my path. And so a big part of it is for me leveraging these communities who are mindful, who are compassionate to give back to this. And then, yoga as that awareness of, that unifying goal of the threads that run through all of us, that connect us regardless of shape or size or color or gender, that we really are the same body electric. We are the same thing. We are all connected to this. And I think yoga is that great unifier that, it's hard to practice yoga for long and not feel that to some extent. And I think we all kind of go in and out of this connection to it. And I think yoga for me is really that, just the kind of foundational work of what we do. And I'm sure that I see a lot of head nodding. So I'm sure that there's a lot of agreement there.
No, I love that, Tiffany, because I mean, I think what I can definitely attest to, every single person on this panel, and I would venture to guess pretty much everyone who signed up and then showed up this morning or this afternoon, depending on where you're at, understands that on some level. And I think that's been part of the paradigm shift that we're seeing, and definitely the challenge I think we've all sort of posed. One of the ways that we've chosen to challenge, right, is that, hey, if you are consistently growing in your yoga practice, it is going to, in some form, naturally or organically lead to, right, your deep sort of commitment to creating change in all of its different forms, right? That this is part of the dynamic nature of life and growth and evolution, that I think you're hard pressed to have a very consistent and deep yoga practice and you don't feel called in some way to be active in the world and to create change. And I think what we saw for a long time, for about that good 15, 20-year span, in I would say United States, other parts of North America, Europe, Australia, New Zealand was specifically, is that there was almost a stalemate with that yoga had become an identity, it had become a lifestyle, it had become a product and a commodity. It was something to say something about who you were, and yet you didn't feel compelled to take action. That was so much of the conversation that I heard during that time, which is why I felt personally compelled to bring together critical consciousness, feminist consciousness, social advocacy with yoga. I was like, if there is going to be a community that really effectively, right, begins to implement change, it would be here theoretically, since everyone claims to be raising their consciousness going inward. And so then it's like, let's actually then do that. And so, I was hearing that also in what you've said, which is, again, Tiffany, such a big part of that paradigm shift. So I would love to see if Maggie, Dianne, or Hala has anything to share about that as well. Yeah, Hala.
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to push back and say, I don't think that just doing yoga gets us to action. I think you actually ended up kind of going there by saying that we have to be deliberate. And part of the impetus for Off the Mat was seeing so many folks who practice yoga get stuck on their mat. If your body is privileged enough by society, you can bypass the pain, you can just get obsessed with your hamstrings and your vegan diet and, all those things. And I know that because I was that person. I was that yoga jerk, right? Like I was like level 2 Ashtanga. I was better than everybody. I knew all the mantras. I could stare at the thing while doing the poses. And I thought I'd reached something. But the truth was I hadn't. The truth was I had just transferred my need to control my body, my need to control my mind, my need to feel better than everybody, and into a language of yoga, right? And I could have stayed stuck there here on the West Side in LA. But it was getting harder and harder because the world was knocking at my door. And then to your point, Melanie, when we apply critical consciousness to yoga, when we include the larger socio-political context that we are in, then yoga is like so badass, right? And so I think that at Off the Mat, a lot of what we do is reflect critically on what do we mean by yoga. How can we look at the ways that we can use yoga to bypass our feelings, the truth of the world, and how do we use yoga to become conscious of all of it? I once heard somebody say, we cannot be selectively conscious, right? We can't just decide the things we want to be aware of. And so a lot of the work that we do at Off the Mat is talk about decolonizing yoga, anti-racism work, anti-oppression work, that originally yoga was meant to be a liberatory practice. It was a practice of disruption, not a practice to maintain the status quo. The thing though with the status quo is it's going to infuse everything we do. So we have to actively keep pushing against it, which is why I love things like this, because we can't do it alone. We have to collaborate. And to your point, Melanie, we all have a different role to play. And so, you know, a lot of the work at Off the Mat is helping people identify their role and helping them get really, really aware of just because you're doing yoga, like actually does not necessarily mean you're contributing towards this disruption. And so how do we actually use these embodied practices to dig deeper and rather than as a bypass? And that's been so exciting. And it's interesting. I think a lot of us got started around the same time. And so the beauty again of collaborating with each other, you know, and uplifting one another, which is central to this, right? It's not about one person and their vision. It's about a biodiversity of those visions. And so I think when you apply that to yoga, yoga is magic. It's really magic.
Yes, actually, I'm totally in agreement with everything. For me, they were always one and the same. I couldn't understand that they were separated, right? And I think,
right.
Kayoko, you had said a lot about that when you had similarly, right? You were going to classes and you were having your sweat, you said, and then all of a sudden something shifted. And I think that's sort of what Hala was talking about in terms of that maybe that there's that decision to be made, right? To actually go deeper into, I think, part of the intention of living in a certain way, not just acting or posing in a certain way. Did you want to add anything else, Kayoko, about Yoga Gives Back when it comes to, right, that empowerment that we were talking about?
Yeah, I just feel like it's not just my special personal experience. Like you said, Melanie, everybody I think here knows what it feels like after a couple of yoga classes, a couple of years, something deeper. I just get, hits you. I kept thinking about this conference today, a couple of days ago, and I said, what's the difference between this group versus like women's tennis group, or, something different. And I used to be very athletic, and I used to do, taekwondo and things like that, competitive exercise. And what's very different with yoga is it just takes you to deeper, like everybody panelists was saying, deeper and deeper. And I studied as a physical exercise, but it ended up changing my life, my profession. So I think everybody goes through that with whatever needs you might have, or you might not be even aware that you had that needs. But to me, it's just finding the voice that maybe because of gender, it was denied for a long time to express. You took the role of daughter or mother or wife or whatever. But something yoga practice, this is why I'm so grateful to and give back to India, because it just makes you find your voice and live with it. So
no, thank you. No, that absolutely. Maggie or Dianne, do you want to add anything to the different ways, right, that yoga in any form, whether it is part of the tool or part of the intention and reason for doing the work, has been used to empower women in all of their diversity in your work?
I can go, Melanie. I think it's just such an important time for all of us to be talking about women's empowerment. Do want to highlight that we are still in the middle of a global pandemic. So there's been so many implications to women related to the economic devastation, the inordinate amount of stress that women are now facing in their homes. And, you know, for our organization in particular, we've really been tracking and monitoring what's been called a pandemic within the pandemic, which has been the increase of domestic violence that we're seeing across the globe, with increased reporting and sometimes less reporting because of the stay-at-home orders. So I think from Exhale to Inhale with our team, we have really choose to challenge where and when wellness can happen. So if we all think of our healing journey, and you can only do yoga if you have these certain circumstances, our community is really focused on bringing yoga to shelters and community agencies where maybe there was never a emphasis on wellness before. And during the pandemic, really trying to bring yoga to people in their homes, even though they might not be able to escape or be able to leave that situation, that they have that support there. And I think all of us have felt the importance of having that space to breathe, having a moment where you feel comfortable and safe within your body during these really difficult times. And for women, particularly those that have been impacted by a form of sexual violence, it can be life-changing to have that sense of power back and to maybe take that positive action that you need to.
Yeah, thank you for that. That I love that you spoke to the pandemic within the pandemic, because especially, I mean, if we're looking not only at the gender-based violence that is happening in the home, but also just all the extra emotional labor, the different ways that many women around the world have left the workforce because of the pandemic to care for children. All of the extra, just work that they're doing, not just emotionally and leaving the workplace, but just the level of responsibility. There have been some really incredible, timely pieces that have been published over the last year talking about how in many ways the pandemic has put us back at least 30 to 40 years in terms of gender equity. So the fact that your organization is addressing one of these really critical components is also so incredibly timely and important to talk about. One thing before I go to Dianne, because I got to hear from Dianne when it comes to this. I do want to mention, if anybody has missed it in the chat, Amanda is saying if anyone here has any questions for the panel to type them in there. We're going to have about 10 or 15 minutes to address those questions, or just any comments that you have. And if you don't have either of those, you're just really taking it in, we'd love to just know where you are tuning in from. So just so we can have some level of just being able to engage with you, just feel free to let us know where you are in the world. And with that, Diana, any extra comments you have for us when it comes to, addressing gender inequity and empowering women in all of their diversity, which I know you talked about a little bit already, but anything you want to add to that with your work?
Yeah, absolutely. For me, it's been really important to center Black voices and to center Black and Brown voices in these conversations as well, because often when we talk about wellness, we see that white voices and white bodies are often centered. So it's always been in my work. How I look at yoga practice in the activist circle is as liberation, right? Moksha. So how do I liberate those of us who don't feel we can take time for self-care? Because a lot of people out there doing activism work, and a lot of women of color do activism work, don't always feel safe in that activism work that we can take a break. We feel like we have to keep our nose to the grindstone and keep going because there aren't going to be people around us to keep moving the conversation forward if we take a moment for a break, right? Like, who's going to continue the fight for us? Because it always hasn't been cohesive together, right? Like, we've often seen women of color, trans women of color as well, in particular, get left out of the wellness conversation. And we often don't have the resources for wellness, or culturally we've been taught that taking time for ourselves is not something we should be doing, right? So I find it's my mindset. And a lot of my girlfriends, I have a Black women's group that practices yoga on Sunday mornings. A lot of our mindset is that we can't We can't take a break from the struggle, not even for a second, because we can't trust everybody within this struggle to do their work and to do their part. So what I find really difficult to teach people of color, women of color in particular, is that it's okay for us to start taking care of ourselves. I never saw my mother take care of herself. I never saw my grandmother take care of herself. And as a person who reaches back to my ancestry and asks those ancestors around me, what can I do to move our fight forward? How can I show up as a Black woman in these spaces, disrupt, center, and encourage other Black women? It's time to take a few moments for yourself. It's time to make peace with the bodies that we're in now, especially now that the bodies that we are in are now cool and commodified, right? To start owning our power, to start showing up and taking care of ourselves so that we can continue the work of being there for others, and to teach our counterparts around us that you can show up and support this work so that women of color who've been carrying the bulk of this work for the majority of time can now also experience wellness and take rest so that we can be more cohesive moving forward in creating this change. So I'm always about who are we not seeing? Why are we not seeing this? Why are women of color not encouraged to take wellness? Why don't we have the resources to take wellness like our white counterparts? We know in the pandemic who is affected the most. The inequities have been broadcast. Who's suffering the most? Who doesn't trust the vaccine because we've had a history of being misused by the medical system? Like, how do we find wellness as people of color within this, bigger wellness industrial complex? And how do we trust the system? We need to trust the system because we need to have women of color in leadership positions and centered in the conversation and showing up for these practices so that other women of color can say, oh, I see her, and if she's doing it, I can do it, right? So sometimes I feel like we miss out, or we're not focusing on the people who've been lifting the most of the burden and who've been closest to the pain in these situations.
Dianne, thank you so much for that. I think that was just such a perfect way to end this part of the conversation. And I want to reflect on it before we go into questions, which is, right, if we're talking about International Women's Day, if we're talking about women's history, right, if we're talking about the ways that we can be in community and solidarity, right, this means that we are using our yoga practice to truly elevate our consciousness, to pose those questions to ourselves, to not need someone else to pose them for us, right? So Dianne had said, who are we missing? Who is not represented? Why are they left out, right? Like, to really ask those critical questions and have them become a normative part of our awareness framework, right? That we don't have to butt up against something where then we pause. It is just constantly something that is running through our awareness. And it takes practice, right? This is why the yoga and the meditation is so perfect. It is a practice to begin to shift the way that we see the world, we experience the world, the way that we're thinking, and how we are checking ourselves, right? Not waiting for someone else to check us or to call us up and out, right? But for us to do that, because that in itself is going to alleviate so much of the burden for so many women, right, in all of their diversity, that it's not just about us, which is something that we had said before, that we are in this larger community, and we have to begin to look at the ways in which, yes, we are butting up against challenges and different forms of oppression, but also recognizing the ways in which we benefit from particular systems that are in place. And the only way to actually have a global women's community, right? A community in which we are truly in solidarity, is to begin to ask those questions of ourselves, and then right, any blind spots, to take new actions, to begin to create not equality, but to really truly create equity and opportunity, and alleviate the burden that is undue, right, on particular segments of the community. In the same way that, quote, women, right, are experiencing all of these sort of gender challenges during the pandemic, when we add in race, when we add in social class, when we add in age, right, in that intersectional way, we can see that also among women that there are extra pressures and burdens in different communities. And so it's important that we are aware. So thank you, Dianne. That is a really powerful and important thing to end that conversation with. And there are a number of comments and questions. So I'm going to actually allow Amanda to pluck out probably one or two that we can then present to the panel, and whoever feels called, Kayoko, Maggie, Tiffany, Dianne, or Hala, to answer, you can feel free to do that. So Amanda, I'm going to pass it over to you.
Okay, thanks. The first question, how have you found unique ways to build connection and community with women during the pandemic? And this was kind of, I mean, it's a great question for all, but also related to someone who just recently moved and didn't have the network that she had where she was. Anyone on the panel like to jump out and tell us how you or your community or your nonprofit has built connection and community during the pandemic?
I can speak to that. You know, what's been really helpful for the pandemic is that we had a pandemic during a time when the internet was available to us. And it's been amazing to be able to practice with teachers all over the world without having to travel to different parts of the world. So what I've done in my community is I created a like a wellness morning. Like I do a self-care Sunday, and today I was lucky enough to do the self-care Sunday on Insight Timer. And the self-care Sunday is always about making peace with our bodies in the moment. And I fully understand that making peace with your body is a whole nuanced and has many layers, and people are on their own personal journeys. But I took it as a leader within my community to create a space online that was open to anybody at any time, that didn't require any financial resources for you to join. Now I'm privileged enough that I can do that. Like it's not, teaching yoga is not my primary source of income. So I'm fortunate enough that that's not a thing for me, that I can offer free classes. So I offer free classes to my community, to anybody who wanted to join. But I also made sure that people understood within this community I was creating that BIPOC voices were going to be centered, because often BIPOC voices are not. So I wanted to make sure that women who were most affected by the pandemic or had a lot going on for them had a safe space to land and to come to practice with me, and that everybody within that space understood who was going to be centered in that space and what voices were going to be centered. So it's like a 90-minute collective community that I just put out on the internet, put out on my social media pages, and said, hey, you are so welcome to join. I have room for 100 people. And then my friend Dee and I decided we would do, at the beginning of every month, a self-care reset. So the first Sunday of every month, we would also offer this donation-based, and then move that money back to people in the community that needed it, that needed access to resources. And we could provide that money for them to either go to class or to, you know, go to the chiropractor, or to have some kind of self-care that was in reason within the pandemic. But I use the internet and the free tools on the internet that we have to create spaces, and then just push that out there and had people share in my circle, you know, this is a free class that you can come to, and in this class your voice will be centered, and in this class you can feel safe, and in this class it'll be accessible, because I'm an adaptable, accessible yoga teacher. So you are going to be able to find your place in this class and have an opportunity to get some true self-care before you go back out in the world and have to deal with all the stresses that come with being in a pandemic, and come with being a woman in a pandemic, and coming from all the things that, you know, that we have to struggle through in our own humanity.
I'm just going to add really quick, very similar to Dianne. That was something I did. My focus was slightly different. As Dianne had said, the first book, Yoga and Body Image, came out in 2014, followed by Yoga Rising in 2018, which Dianne is actually on the cover of, and she wrote the foreword to. And then last September, Embodied Resilience. And all three of those books are anthologies. So I've really been a collector and curator of stories. Personal narratives to me are so incredibly powerful in not only processing and rewriting our stories, but also to connect to others, so that people can create that heart-to-heart human connection to issues and experiences that they may have no understanding of or have never been exposed to, and be connected on that particular level. So for me, naturally, when the pandemic started, I really did a public call to individuals who wanted to meet once a week to write our stories, to write and create resilience. And so that was something that I felt really compelled, like, how can we come together and how can we share, how can we commune, and how can we write and really process what is happening, what we're feeling, and then come on the other side of it as well. So I just wanted to share that and see if Kayoko, Maggie, Tiffany, or Hala have anything else to share for that question. Yeah, Kayoko?
Yes, so I totally agree, and I can see some comments, but the one silver lining of COVID-19 is that Zoom came like everybody's standard, tool, everybody in the world. And like even this conversation, I thought about this collaboration in a way, in a selfish way, because if I'm doing this event by myself for my organization, it's one thing. But if I invite everybody with the like-minded leaders like you guys, we can share the same passion, like cost effective, and we can reach more people. And I think that's really powerful. And so many people joining from all over the world. So I think collaboration, like Hala and Tiffany also, really emphasize, but I think the collaboration, not competition, is the key. And we have learned that importance even more during the pandemic. Just wanted to add.
Thank you. Does anybody else have anything on the panel to add? Or if not, we can go to the next question. So I'll give it a pause, give it a beat if any of you want to add anything to that question. Yeah, Hala?
I'll be brief, but ironically, before COVID hit, I was already building a membership community, an online one, more with the intention of making the work accessible to folks who might not have people in their communities. And so that's been a really beautiful process of, being offered sliding scale, nobody's turned away. And in addition to getting these practices, we do these live calls. And what's been really special is just once a month getting to check in. And so I talk to folks and then they go into small breakout groups and they just talk to one another. And it has been so moving to do that, to just have these spaces to also virtually build community. And so that's been a really special process.
Yeah, and your community has been incredible. I am part of that community and it's really fantastic. So many different ways that we can do that. Tiffany or Maggie, do you have anything to add? It's fine if you do. It's totally fine either way.
I think it was well answered.
Okay, perfect. All right, Amanda, do you want to pull one more question and then we'll go, and then we'll go into closing. Yeah.
Yep. This question specifically is, as a white teacher, how can you welcome more women of color? I'll leave it at that. As a white teacher, how can I welcome more women of color?
I find this is always a hard question, and it's one that I get a lot from a lot of people. I'm a white teacher, I'm a white presenting teacher. I want to make my spaces feel really comfortable for people of color. And it's a difficult place to be in right now. It's a really interesting place to be in, but a really difficult place because so many people are interested in activism work right now. And I find the number one thing that my students have told me about, my students of color have told me about, that is a deterrent to going into spaces is people who haven't done their self-study work around their own bias or around what they believe about people who look different than them. So you show up to a yoga space and you're othered right away, whether it's they want to touch your hair or ask you where you're from, or ask you if you've ever done yoga before, or whatever it is, that these microaggressions that show up in spaces that make people very uncomfortable. So if you are a person who is not of color and you want to share a space, I would really recommend that you do your own work around what your bias is. And so that when people of color show up into your space, you aren't going to further create a difficult place for them to be while they're trying to find their own healing. And so if you're interested in this, my podcast, Two Black Girls Talk About Everything, I spoke to two Black men who are yoga practitioners and healers, and they share their experience of being othered in spaces where they're trying to find healing, and some of the things that they would recommend people do, not only so that I'm not speaking for all women of color, or I'm not speaking for all Black people, but that'll give you an idea of how it feels to walk in these spaces. And then you can do the work around, what is my bias? How do I want to show up? How do I want to be in community with people of color? And how do I go about doing that for myself? Because it's a very individualized process. But remember that everybody has their own bias around this. We live in a white supremacist culture where we are taught this. So we have to really unpack what we're feeling and why we want to engage people of color in our spaces. Is it because we want to make ourselves feel better? Is it because we feel we should be doing these things? Or is it because we really want to create a change in the world? And so the change starts with us. So I would recommend doing your own self-study around this before you dive into the arena around that. And if you're interested in supporting people of color in wellness, go to their classes, buy their workshops, buy their books, learn from them, because the people at the top of the yoga food chain are white women. So you can support creators of color by supporting our work. As you're doing your own bias work, right? As you're figuring out where you are in this yoga community, you can support us by supporting our work and taking classes around what you believe and why you believe it. And then while you're unpacking this, you will figure out the best way for you to show up in the yoga space for people of color.
Love that. Thank you, Dianne. Yes, absolutely. I want to add something to what Dianne was saying in terms of, kind of beginning the process of doing our own individual work. Harvard has the Harvard implicit bias test. Many of you are familiar. Some of you may not be. So if you are not, if you just Google Harvard implicit bias test,
it's not a perfect test, but it's a good one. Like, it's a good place to start.
Absolutely. And you can do implicit bias test on weight, on age, on size, on gender. I'm also putting in the chat a link to the second anthology I mentioned, Yoga Rising, in which Dianne wrote the foreword and is on the cover. I've been giving away for the last 5 months a free digital download of that book. And that's another great place to start going into those personal narratives, learning more about individuals doing this kind of work and being able to reflect on, what do I authentically feel called to do? How am I in integrity? How can I be in greater integrity? Where do I start? And there's a whole list of resources at the end. So I think that is a beautiful way to end. Kayoko, thank you for putting the link and reminding everyone that where you registered, all the links to the organizations are there. And I'd love to just bring this to a close to make sure we're honoring everyone's time. And so we'll go into a closing meditation just for a couple moments. So you're welcome to leave your camera on. You can turn it off for privacy if you'd like. If you feel comfortable, you can close your eyes, or you can just narrow your focus down to a point in front of you. I'm going to personally close my eyes, keep my camera on, and then just invite you in. Starting to notice the breath flowing in and out through the nostrils, and allowing your chin to begin to move down towards your chest. Noticing that you have one long line of energy from the tailbone through the crown of the head. So the spine is erect but supple, not rigid, having a little bit of fluidity. Allowing the breath to not only bring you inward, but to allow you to soften the scalp, the face, the tongue, and the jaw. Maybe that skin behind your ears, softening between the eyebrows, letting the breath continue to flow in and out gently and fully. Continuing to allow that breath to soften any hard edges, soften any density in the body. And coming to this beautiful place of stillness and receptivity. Letting that stillness become tangible. And as each one of us comes into the still place within ourselves and within the physical space that we're occupying, sensing and feeling the connection to all of the women all across the world that have chosen to show up today, all the women across the world, whether they are sleeping or feeding children or taking care of elders, working, resting, but feeling our part in this larger constellation. Continuing to breathe and dropping in while being connected, fortifying that connection, that tapestry of this community. Taking this moment in stillness to really imprint this level of celebration and protest that we have today as we honor the legacy of women all across the globe that have come before us. All of the women who are actively resisting and challenging gender inequity, right, in this present moment in time. And how that becomes a beacon of light as we move towards the future, creating more opportunities, creating more space, creating more access, greater representation, greater opportunity. Allowing this moment, this connection, this time that we've had together to fortify our commitment, our why, our yes. The conscious actions to create greater solidarity, to move us into greater integrity, to live our values. And feeling that deep in our hearts, not just in our minds, but in our hearts, in our body. And allowing this focus, this intention, and this breath to move us out of desire or the dream or the idea, but into the lived reality that we are all co-creating together. Seeing ourselves as an agent of change, that we are enough, we are more than enough, we are capable, and we are part of that collective movement to choose to challenge gender inequity in all of its forms. Continuing to breathe, to connect, to ground, to envision. And taking a few more breaths on your own to resonate with that intention, that desire, and this incredible connection to all of the women here on this call, all of the women across the globe. And taking a final breath, filling the lungs, allowing it to relax the body, still the mind. And when you're ready, exhaling completely. And slowly, when you feel ready, you can transition to opening your eyes. And I am going to pass it over to Kayoko. As Kayoko mentioned, this was part of her call to action during the pandemic to create greater connection. And it's been such an honor to work with her and to have this panel come together. So I want to give Kayoko the opportunity to close us out. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you, Melanie, for leading this conversation. I just would love to, and thank you everybody for being here today. I would love the panelists to say final words. This was obviously our first, and I hope to grow it together. And all the panelists and the attendees, please email us and say like what we can do more or how we can change it. But please say your like comment about how it felt today being together. So let's go alphabetically again. Diana.
Thank you. It's an honor, and I don't very often get to interact with people who are doing this work from their heart and so authentically in a panel such as this one. So it was good to connect with people I haven't seen in a long time, people I've never met before, and to know that we are in this together. We might not be the same, as yoga sometimes will bypass us into that. Our struggles are similar, and we're connected by our want to be better and to do better and to show up for everyone. And that was a perfect representation of what happened here today. So I just wanted to say thank you for allowing me to share my voice and to be a part of it, and for me to support a woman of color doing the work as well. That's very important to me.
Thank you, Diane. Tiffany?
Yeah, I think I'm brought back to this reminder. There's so many ways that we can get involved, and I think we all see. I've seen the comments on the side of people wanting to help, which I think is so wonderful to see. I also think there's really important work, like Diane was talking about before, is looking at the inner layer and taking away the filter. I think our job is also to drop this idea of good or bad or right or wrong, and get curious, create communities where we look out for the good in each other. We look for the good in each other, not just as women, but really as humans, to set the stage for a better future, when we're working together, when we're building communities together, when we're lifting each other up, lifting women up as well, and seeing each other as equal and capable beings, and creating all these safe communities where we can show up and really see each other as we are, and appreciate each other as we are, and have these communities that help to carry that through. And these inclusive communities that remind us that there's not just one way, that there's not a right or wrong, but to create these bridges that allow us to work together for the greater good, where we all win. And really, this is happening every day. I think, we are quite literally changing these gender barriers and inequality every single day. And this deeply ingrained belief that women are less than is really such a big part of that. And it's up to us to break the cycle. And so, obviously there's a lot of ways you can do that by getting involved with any one of or all of these great organizations on here today, by donating, by becoming maybe more of a volunteer or more actively engaged, or maybe that's through the internal work, as Diane was talking about, which is such an important part of what we do. But as Hala said too, we have to continue that, and we have to take it off the mat. We've got to be committed to doing something more, whether that means changing something that's going on in our households or our communities, changing how we see things from the inside out. And this constant reminder to continue to step up and shift the way we and even just our friends and family see things. So I thank you so much to Kayoko for putting all this together. Thank you to all of the panelists. It's such a pleasure. And I echo what Diane said. It's so nice to be able to have these conversations and hear from such inspiring people and share in that. So thank you for having me.
Thank you, Tiffany. Hala, thank you.
Well, I'm just happy to be here, and just reminded to what Diane said, just like getting to connect, and it's so nurturing. And oftentimes, I know I and many other people, women especially, we are told to tend to others. And so remembering that having nourishing spaces to be mirrored, to be seen, to remember that we're not in it alone is vital. So I'm feeling really filled up by this. So thank you.
Thanks, Hala. Maggie?
Yes, thank you everyone so much for being here. I really just loved thinking about people gathering from across the world. Someone from Italy, I think, someone from Missouri, and that sense of connection is so important, particularly during COVID-19. And the yoga community is really such a special place. And I think if you are feeling isolated, come join our communities, come be part of what we're doing. Everyone is welcome. Everyone has a gift and something to offer. And that we've certainly seen that through the Exhale to Inhale community. I think for me personally, when I think about women's empowerment, I think of my daughter, who just turned 6 this week, and thinking about what the future might look like for her. And she brought home a book this week from the library called Each Kindness by Jacqueline Woodson. And they were talking about putting a stone into a lake and the ripple effect that that has. And it reminds me today of, like, all of us being here, that in the book it says each little thing we do goes out like a ripple into the world. So if we can think of our connection here, of the great foundation that so many, Hala and Dianne, that you lead through the support that you provide to the community and to our teachers, if we can all take that and see the ripple effect of when we come together, we're stronger. When we share information, we're stronger, and we truly can make an impact in the world, particularly for those that may not have a voice or may not have access to the same things as others. So thanks again for the opportunity to be here. And I see so many Exhale to Inhale teachers on here as well. It's so nice to see you here.
Thank you, Maggie. So it's 10:30, so we are right on time. Thank you everybody for being here. I hope, we just go out. Tomorrow is International Women's Day again, and we'll do what we have to do and keep trying our best. And it would be nice to come back here once a year and check out what you've been doing for the year and share and empower each other. So thank you very much for everybody who attended again. If you have any comments, just email us. But thank you. Have a great International Women's Day.